Hi 2SA. I hope you guys are having a great day today. I hope you had a great Mother's Day with your families yesterday. Today we're going to start a new read aloud. It's called The World According to Humphrey. We're going to read the first two chapters. I'm outside right now celebrating my Mother's Day. I'm outside my own mom's house. The home audience is playing and listening. They're here to say hello. Careful.
Hi.
And they're going to listen, and I don't know where our other home audience member is, but we're going to get started. Okay, so here we go. That's not a good angle, sorry. Oi, okay. The World According to Humphrey. Chapter 1 is called The Return of Mrs. Brisbane. Today was the worst day of my life. Miss Mack left room 26 of Longfellow's school for good, and that's bad. Worse yet, Mrs. Brisbane came back. Until today, I didn't even know there was a Mrs. Brisbane. Lucky me. Now I want to know, what was Miss Mack thinking? She must have known that soon she'd be leaving without me, and that Mrs. Brisbane would come back to room 26 and I'd be stuck with her. I still love Miss Mack more than any human or hamster on earth, but what was she thinking? You can learn a lot about yourself by taking care of another species, she told me on the way home the day she got me. You'll teach those kids a thing or two. That's what she was thinking. I don't think she was thinking very clearly. I'm never going to squeak to her again. Of course, I'll probably never see her again because she's gone. But if she comes back, I'm not even going to look at her. So you notice this story is being told from the point of view of Humphrey, who is a hamster. I know that last sentence doesn't make sense. It's hard to make sense when your heart is broken. On the other hand, until Miss Mack arrived, I was going nowhere down at Pet-O-Rama. My days were spent sitting around, looking at a bunch of furry things in cages just like mine. We were treated all right, regular meals, clean cages, music piped in all day. Over the music, Carl, the store clerk, would answer the phone. Open 9 to 9, 7 days a week, corner of 5th and Adler, next to the Dairy Maid. Back then, I feared I'd never see 5th and Adler, much less the Dairy Maid. Sometimes I'd see human eyes and noses, not always as clean as they should be, poking up against the glass. But nothing ever came of it. The children were excited to see me, but the parents usually had other ideas. Oh, come see the fishes, Cornelia, so colorful and so much easier to take care of than a hamster, Mama might say. Or, no, Norbert, they have the cutest little puppies over here. After all, a dog is a kid's best friend. So there we were, hamsters, gerbils, mice, and guinea pigs, not nearly as possible as the fish, cats, or dogs. I suspected that I'd be spinning my wheel at Pet-O-Rama forever. But once Miss Mack carried me out the door a short 6 weeks ago, my life changed fast. I saw 5th, I saw Adler, I saw the Dairy Maid with the statue of a cow in an apron outside. I was dozing when she first came to Pet-O-Rama, which I do during the day because hamsters are more active at night. Hello, a warm voice wakened me. When I opened my eyes, I saw a mouse of bouncy black curls, a big happy smile, huge dark eyes. She smelled of apples. It was love at first sight. Aren't you the bright-eyed one, she asked. And might I return the compliment, I replied. Of course it came out, squeak, 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 as usual. Miss Mack opened up her purse with the big pink and blue flowers on it. I'll take him, she told Carl. He's obviously the most intelligent and handsome hamster you have. Carl grunted. Then Miss Mack picked out a respectable cage. Okay, not the 3-story pagoda I'd had my eye on, but a nice cage. And soon, amid squeals of encouragement from my friends in the small pet department, from the teeniest white mouse to the lumbering chinchilla, I left Pet-O-Rama with high hopes. We sped down the street in Miss Mack's bright yellow car. She called it a bug, but I could see it was really a car. She carried my cage up the stairs to her apartment. We ate apples. We watched TV. She let me run around outside my cage. She gave me my very own name, Humphrey. And she told me all about room 26, where we'd be going the next morning. And since you are an intelligent hamster who is going to school, I have a present for you, Humphrey, she said. Then she gave me a tiny little notebook and a tiny little pencil. I got these for you at the doll shop, she explained. She tucked them behind my mirror where no one could see them except me. Of course it might be a while before you learn to read and write, she continued, but you're smart and I know you'll catch on fast. Little did she know I could already make out some words from my long, boring days at Pedorama. Words like chew toys, kibble, pooper scoopers. Remember, a hamster is grown up at about 5 weeks old, so if I could learn all the skills I need for life in 5 weeks, how long could it possibly take to learn to read? I'll tell you, a week. Yep, in a week I could read and even write a little with the tiny pencil. In addition to schoolwork, I learned quite a bit about the other students in room 26. Like lower your voice AJ and speak up Saya and wait for the ball Garth and Golden Miranda. Even after I found out her name is really Miranda Golden, I thought of her as Golden Miranda because of her long blonde hair. After all, I am a golden hamster. Yes, life in room 26 suited me well during the day. My cage had all the comforts a hamster could ask for. I had bars on the window to protect me from my enemies. I had a little sleeping house in one corner where no one could see me or bother me. There was my wheel to spin on, and of course, and a lovely pile of nesting material. My mirror came in handy to check my grooming and to hide my notebook. In one corner, I kept my food. The opposite corner was my bathroom area because hamsters like to keep their poo away from their food. Who doesn't? All my needs were taken care of in one convenient cage. At night, I went home from school with Miss Mack and we watched TV or listened to music. Sometimes Miss Mack played on her bongo drums. She made a tunnel on the floor so I could race and wiggle to my hamster's heart content. Oh, the memories of those 6 weeks with Morgan McNamara. That's her real name, but she told her students to call her Miss Mack. That's how nice she is, or was. On the weekends, Miss Mack and I had all kinds of adventures. She put me in her shirt pocket right over the heart, and absolutely not, and took me with her to the laundry room. She had friends over and they laughed and made a fuss over me. She even took me for a bike ride once. I can still feel the wind in my fur. I didn't have an inkling until this morning of the unsqueakable thing she was about to do to me. On the way to work, she said, "Humphrey, I hate to tell you, but this is my last day in room 26, and I'm going to miss you more than you'll ever know." What was she saying? I held on to my wheel for dear life. You see, it's really Mrs. Brisbane's class, but just before school started, her husband was in an accident, so I took over the class. Today, she's coming back for good. Good? I could see nothing good in what Miss Mack was saying. Besides, I want to see the world, Humphrey, she told me. Fine with me. I've thoroughly enjoyed what I've seen so far and would go to the ends of the earth with Miss Mack. But she wasn't finished yet. I can't take you with me. All hopes dashed, completely. Besides, the kids need you to teach them responsibility. Mrs. Brisbane needs you too. Unfortunately, she didn't tell Mrs. Brisbane that. Mrs. Brisbane was already in room 26 when we arrived. She smiled at Miss Mack and shook her hand. Then she frowned at me and said, "Is that some kind of rodent?" Miss Mack gave her the speech about how much kids can learn from taking care of another species. Mrs. Brisbane looked horrified and said, "I can't stand rodents, take it back." The it she was talking about was me. Miss Mack didn't bat an eyelash. She put my cage in its usual place next to the window and said the kids were already very attached to me. She attached Dr. Harvey H. Hammer's Guide to the Care and Feeding of Hamsters to the cage along with a chart to make sure I was fed and my cage was cleaned on time. The children knew what to do. "You won't have to do a thing," Miss Mack said as Mrs. Brisbane glared at me. Just then, my fellow students came streaming into the room, and within half an hour, Miss Mack had said goodbye to everyone, including me. "I'll never forget you, Humphrey," she whispered. "Don't you forget me either." "Not likely, but I don't know if I can ever forgive you," I squeaked. And then she was gone, without me. Mrs. Brisbane didn't even come close to my cage until recess. Then she walked over and said, "Mister, you've got to go." But she doesn't know my secret. The latch on my cage door doesn't work. It never has. It's the lock that doesn't lock. So I've got news for Mrs. Brisbane. If I've got to go, it will be when and where I decide to go, not her. Meanwhile, I'm not turning my back on this woman, not for a second. If I ever disappear and someone finds this notebook, just check out Mrs. Brisbane, please. Tip 1. Choose your new hamster's home very carefully and make sure it is secure. Hamsters are skillful escape artists, and once out of their cages, they are very difficult to find. Guide to the Care and Feeding of Hamsters by Dr. Harvey Hammer. So we'll see what happens now that Humphrey is left in the classroom and Miss Mack is gone. Chapter 2 is called Nightlife. For the rest of the day, I felt sad, sad, sad. "You look sad, Humphrey," Golden Miranda said when she was cleaning my cage right before lunch. According to the chart Miss Mack had left, it was her turn to take care of me, thank goodness. Miranda was the best cage cleaner and never said yuck. She put on throwaway gloves, then cleaned my potty corner, changed my bedding, gave me fresh water, and finally, oh joy, gave me fresh grain, some lettuce, and mealworms. "This will make you happy," she said as she slipped me the special treat she'd brought from home, cauliflower. Naturally, Miranda had good taste. I promptly saved it in my cheek pouch until I could store it in my sleeping house. Hamsters like to stash food for the future. After my cage was taken care of, I felt well enough to observe Mrs. Brisbane more carefully. Now Miss Mack was tall, wore bright blouses, short skirts, and high shoes. She wore bracelets that jingle-jangled. She spoke in a loud voice and waved her arms and walked all around the room when she taught. Mrs. Brisbane, on the other hand, was short with short gray hair. She wore dark clothes and flat shoes, and she didn't jingle-jangle at all. She spoke in a voice just loud enough to hear and sat at her desk or stood at the chalkboard when she taught. No wonder I was feeling drowsy after lunch. All that nice food and all that soft talking. "Is that all this hamster does, sleep?" she asked at one point when she glanced over at my cage. "Well, he's ternal," replied Raise Your Hand Heidi Hopper. "Raise your hand, Heidi," said Mrs. Brisbane. "What's ternal?" "You know, ternal. He sleeps during the day," said Heidi. I was wide awake now. "Nocturnal," I squeaked. "Hamsters are nocturnal." "Oh, you mean nocturnal," said Mrs. Brisbane, almost as if she had understood me. She turned and wrote the word on the board. "Can anyone else name an animal that's nocturnal?" "Owl," said Heidi. "Raise your hand, Heidi," said Mrs. Brisbane, "but that is correct. An owl is nocturnal. Anyone else?" A voice shouted out, "My dad." Mrs. Brisbane looked around. Who said that? "He did, AJ." Garth Tugwell pointed at AJ. Both boys sat at the table nearest to my cage. "What about your dad?" Mrs. Brisbane asked. AJ squirmed in his seat. "Well, my mom always says my dad is nocturnal because he stays up so late watching TV. Stop Giggling Gail and a few other students snickered. Mrs. Brisbane didn't crack a smile. "Her use of the word is correct," she said, "though technically humans are not nocturnal. Any others?" Eventually, the class came up with more names of nocturnal animals, like bats and coyotes and opossums, and Mrs. Brisbane said that the class would be learning more about animal habits later in the year. If she'd just look at me, she could learn a lot. But I noticed for the rest of the day that Mrs. Brisbane stayed far away from my cage, as if I had a disease or something. She read a mighty fine story to us in the afternoon, though. In fact, I couldn't get back to my nap afterward. It was about a scary house and these scratching noises and a ghost. Thump, 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 the ghost came down the hall. Ooh, I had shivers and quivers. I have to say, Mrs. Brisbane knows how to read a story. Her voice changed and her eyes got wide, and I forgot about her gray hair and her dark suit. To squeak the truth, my fur was on end. The story had a funny ending because it turned out the ghost wasn't a ghost at all, it was an owl. At the end of the story, everyone laughed, even Mrs. Brisbane. I was beginning to think that life with this new teacher wouldn't be so bad, but I changed my mind when the bell rang at the end of the day and all my classmates raced out of the room, leaving me alone with her. She erased the chalkboard and gathered up her papers. I could tell that we'd be going home soon. Suddenly, I began to worry. What if Mrs. Brisbane lived in a scary house with spooky noises and a thumping ghost? Or even worse, what if Mrs. Brisbane had a scary pet like a dog? My mind was racing as fast as I was spinning my wheel when she finally approached and looked down at me frowning. "Well, you're on your own now," she said. With that, she closed the blinds and walked away, but I heard her mutter "rodent" under her breath. She left the classroom and closed the door. She left me alone, all alone in room 26. I had never been all alone before. As the room slowly grew darker and quieter, I thought back to the happy times at Miss Mack's apartment. There were always cheery lights on and music and telephone talking, and oh dear, during the day I never noticed how the clock on the wall ticked off the seconds one by one very loudly. Tick, tick, tick. I was feeling sick, sick, sick. I wondered if there were any owls around room 26, or ghosts. I tried to pass the time by writing in my notebook about Pedorama and my days at Miss Mack's apartment. Writing took my mind off my jittery nerves, but eventually my writing paw began to ache and I had to stop my scratchings. If only I could roam free as I had at Miss Mack's apartment. Then I remembered the lock that doesn't lock. It only took a few seconds to jiggle the door open. I skittered across the table. Then grasping the top of the table leg tightly, I closed my eyes and slid to the ground. Ah, freedom. I dashed along the shiny floor. I darted between the tables and chairs. I stopped to niggle a peanut underneath Stop Giggling Gail's chair. It tasted delicious and made the coolest crunching sound. I chewed and chomped and gnawed and nibbled, and when I stopped, I heard the sound. Thump, thump, thump. Just like the story Mrs. Brisbane had read us. Thump, thump, thump. Closer and closer down the hall, coming toward room 26. Then, rattle, scratch, thump, thump, thump. Suddenly, I longed for the protective comfort of my cage. I dropped what was left of the peanut and scampered back. But when I got to the table, I thought a terrible thought. I had slid down the smooth, shiny leg straight down, but how was I going to climb up again? I flung myself up the table leg, grabbed on, and pushed up, up, up. but I had only made a little progress when I began to slide down, down, down. I was right back where I'd started. The rattling got louder. The sounds weren't coming toward room 26 anymore. They were coming in room 26. Just then, I noticed a long cord running down from the blinds. Without hesitation, I leapt up and grabbed the cord and began swinging back and forth. My stomach churned, and I wished I'd never touched that peanut. But with each swing, I got a little higher off the ground. As soon as I saw the edge of the table, I closed my eyes and dived toward it. Whoosh! I slid across the table and scampered into the cage. As I pulled the door behind me, I was suddenly blinded by light. The something had turned on the lights and was clomping across the floor. It was huge and heavy and coming right toward me. Just then, my eyes adjusted to the light and I saw the thing. It was a man. "Well, well, who have we here? A new student," a voice boomed. The man was smiling down at me. My, that was a lovely piece of fur across his upper lip. A nice black mustache. He bent down to peer in at me. "I'm Aldo Amato, and who are you?" "I'm Humphrey, and you scared me half to death," I told him. But as always, all that came out was squeak, squeak, squeak. Aldo squinted at the sign on my cage. "Oh, you're Humphrey. Hope I didn't scare you half to death," he said with a laugh. "But I've just come to clean the room. I come every night." "But where have you been?" he said. He rolled up a big cart with a bucket and mops and brooms and all kinds of bottles and rags on it. "Oh, that's right," he replied as if we were having a real conversation. "Mrs. Brisbane came back today. She's a good teacher, you know, Humphrey. Been teaching here a long time. Wish I'd had a good teacher like her. Say, do you like music, Humphrey?" Squeak, squeak, squeak. I tried to tell him I love music almost as much as I love Mrs. Mack. Suddenly, a song came blasting out of the radio on his cart, and he set to work, sweeping, mopping, moving desks, dusting. But Aldo Amato didn't just dust and mop. He spun and swayed. He hopped and leaped. He twisted and twirled. "How do you like the floor show?" Aldo asked me as he grasped the mop like a dancer holding his partner. "Get it? It's a floor show because I'm cleaning the floor." Then Aldo roared the biggest roar of a laugh I'd ever heard. His big mustache shook so much I thought it might fall off. "You like that? I'll show you a real talent, Humphrey." Aldo Amato picked up his broom and very carefully stood it up with the very tip balancing on one outstretched fingertip. It wiggled from side to side, but Aldo moved with the broom and managed to keep it balanced straight in the air for an amazingly long time. When he finished, he bowed deeply and said, "What do you think? I'm going to join the circus." And he roared again. Then Aldo wiped his forehead with a big bandana and sat down at the table where AJ usually sits. "You know what, Humphrey? You're such good company. I think I'll take my dinner break with you. Do you mind?" "Please, please, please," I squeaked. Aldo pulled his chair right up to my cage. "Hey, you're a handsome guy like me. Here, a little bit of green won't hurt you, will it?" He tore off a piece of lettuce from his sandwich and pushed it through the bars. Of course, I hid it in my cheek pouch. Aldo chuckled. "Good for you, Humphrey. Always have something for a rainy day." The two of us shared a very pleasant meal as Aldo told me about how he used to have a regular job where he worked during the day, but then his company closed down and he couldn't find a job for a long time. He couldn't even pay the rent when he was lucky enough to get hired here at Longfellow School. He was glad to get the job, but it's lonely working at night because his friends work during the day. They can never get together like they used to. I tried to squeak to him about all the creatures like me that are also nocturnal, and Aldo listened. "I know you're trying to tell me something, Humphrey, but I can't tell what it is. Maybe you're just saying I'm not alone after all, huh?" Squeak! He understood. Aldo stood up and threw his trash into the plastic bag on his cart. "Well, I've got a lot of other rooms to clean, my friend, but I'll be back tomorrow night. Maybe I'll take my dinner breaks with you again." Aldo pushed his cart toward the door and reached for the light switch. "No, no, no," I squeaked, dreading the thought of being plunged into darkness again. Aldo stopped. "I hate to leave you in the dark, but if I don't turn off the lights, I could lose my job." He clomped back across the floor to the window. "Tell you what, I'll leave the blinds open a little. There's a nice light right outside your window." "Shh." After he turned off the lights and left, I chomped on the lettuce I'd saved and basked in the warm glow of the streetlight and my new friendship with Aldo. Tip 2, hamsters are not picky about their food and eat very little. Make sure to feed your pet a wide variety of tasty foods. Guide to the Care and Feeding of Hamsters, Dr. Harvey H. Hammer. And that's the end of the first 2 chapters of The Adventures of Humphrey.